V'Yaakov holach ledarkoi.
Yeah. So I'm starting the recording, so if everybody could put on silent. Okay, good morning. We're in Ayin Beis, page 1156. And the discussion is about the context, coming to explain that there are different levels of oil. Is this? Am I frozen? Do you hear me? Do you guys hear me and see me?
You're very clear.
Yes.
Okay.
We don't see you.
I hear you.
I see you and hear you.
Okay.
We don't see you.
I don't have to tell you. Okay, so this mimer on last page 1150.
You are not visible.
I
Some
see you.
people see me, some don't. I don't know.
Okay, so probably you have to resolve it. Roye ve'eino inira. Go ahead. Okay, we see you now.
Remember, everything you're saying is going to be recorded forever. So, so this mimer, after a long discussion about yesh, ayin, and yesh, that the whole Seder Shtalshlus is structured three general levels. Yesh Amiti is the absolute and true reality of Atzmus. Yesh Hanivra is the created reality of our existence, and the Ayin Be'emtza is the channel, the field of energy in between the Oyer, which of course is part of the whole discussion of Das Elyon and Das Tachten, how the Yesh Hamiti looks at existence and how the Yesh Hanivra looks at what's above it. So different ways of looking at what Ayin is, whether Ayin means completely nullified, as it is from the perspective of Yesh Hamiti, or Ayin means that it's not a mitzias, it's not a davar, substance as the Yesh Hanivra is, and it's a mysterious, it's an unknown entity. It's ein musig, it's not comprehensible. So now in this mimer, and one second, I should just say, and that's part of the whole discussion that followed the whole idea of Shabbos and the weekdays, man, lechem min hashemaim, lechem min haaretz, that there's two perspectives, which of course is so fundamental to the whole interface theme of Ayin Beis, the two perspectives, because you want to have interface, the joining and the fusion of both perspectives, which we didn't get to yet. Right now we're discussing these two perspectives. Das Elyon, how it's from the yesh, that Lamaila is the yesh and Lamata is Ayin, or the Das Tachten, the Lamata is the yesh, below, and the Ayin is above. So, but then in this mimer, he said, but the Pasuk Kel Deis Havaya indicates that the Deis, the two Deis, Dasa and Das Tachten, is in Havaya itself. That means in Elikus itself, in the Oyer, in the Ayin itself, there's these two perspectives. It's not just Atzmus, the Yesh Hamiti, looking at the Ayin, and the Yesh HaNivra looking at the Ayin from below. But it's actually in the Ayin itself, these two levels of Ayin are the two perspectives in Das Tachten, Das and Das Tachten. And once he said that, he says, so the Ayin itself has a perspective from above. And as I explained at length when we began the mimer, why is that so important? Because now it means that God transferred Das Elyon also to Oyer. That also the Oyer in Metzias Nimtza, in our existence, has a perspective from above, which means we also can ultimately attain that level. So in explaining that, he said, this is a key line that opens up this whole new section. That we could, this ayin itself, what does this bittul consist of? There's kamei fanim. There's several ways, or you could say several levels of bittul. So we're going to learn 4 different levels from the bottom up. And the one we're learning right now is what's called Heder Tfisas Mokim. The bittul is that it doesn't have any significant self-value in the presence and the awareness of what is higher than it. So because the ayin, the oir, is connected, attached, dovuk, attached to its source, and it's margish, it feels and senses its source, therefore it's completely nullified. That's the level of bittul. But to analyze his bittul, he asked a question. The you could say that one light, one gili, compared to a higher gili, is nullified. But you're talking about atzmus here. That's beyond Geder Gili. How do you say Heder Tfisas Mokim Legaba Atzmus? So to answer that, he said that Oir really has two sides to it. On one hand, yes, it's completely distant from Atzmus, because Atzmus is not Geder Gili. Atzmus is beyond being a Moir, just like Atzmus is beyond being a Boira. So even though everything comes from Atzmus, but he's completely beyond it. On the other hand, he made the statement that the derech Yesa, even though the Eir is in a reich to Atzmus just as Yesh is, but the derech Yesavos, the manner in which it emerges from Atzmus, is not Shalei Berech. That's the statement. To explain that, we're learning now on page 1156, and this will conclude on top of 1157, the Yuv Yesh Levayirze, by using an example from Rotzen, from the difference between Rotzen and Seichel. So what we've learned so far is the following. Two key points. One is that Rotzen and Seichel both come, of course, from the Nefesh. You have no intelligence if there's no soul. And you have no desire, no Rotzen, no desire if there's no soul. But the way they come from the soul is different. That one, he calls it, one is, Rotzen is Einich Chutz La'atzmus HaNefesh. It's not outside of the core soul. And Seichel is Chutz La'atzmus HaNefesh. When we learn Tzadik Daled on this piece, he elaborates a lot more on this. But I already gave some explanations. I'm not going to go over it again because we explained the last two classes. And then he says even furthermore. And I mean, just sum up briefly, because Seichel is a koyach prati. It's a specific faculty. So you can't say it reflects Asmus HaNefesh. Rotzen is the desire, whatever the Nefesh wants, Rotzen is reflective of. Seichel is only one aspect of the Nefesh's faculties. Kamoy Ken Yuvan, he says, and even furthermore, that the Inyam Mitzias HaSeichel VaRotzen, how the way the existence of Seichel and Rotzen as they come from the Koiches Atzmim, which is, as I explained at length in the last class, the faculties as they are embedded, ingrained within the soul, that they also come differently. That the Seichel Baba Derech Nivdal, the Seichel comes in a way that's like separate from. Obviously, it's connected to the soul and comes from the soul, but it's, like I just explained, since it's a specific faculty, it does not relate to the Atzmi so much. It's rooted there, but it's rooted in a type of like in a detached way. Mashenken Rotzen. Rotzen is not B'derech Nivdal. And to understand this, we haven't finished this topic. So if you don't have the full picture, don't be concerned, because the Rebbe Rashab, we didn't learn further. We're in the middle of the subject. So what did he start saying? So I'm going to read from the Hina Yedua now. We'll start from Hina Yedua. It's line 6-7 on the top of page 1156. If you need the text, the PDF, go to ayinbeis.com and you can follow along if you don't have the text. Okay. It says the Hina Yedua. It's going now into a longer discussion of how the faculty, Seichel, comes from higher states. So I explained in the last class, if you remember, Keiches Gluyim, Keiches Lelomim, Keiches Hiyulim, Keiches Atzmim. So he says like this now. The Hina Yedua, now because it's known, the Sichlim Hamnim Shachim B'derech Er Yosher, the Sichlim, meaning intelligence, conceptions, ideas, that come B'derech Er Yosher. He's going to explain Er Yosher and Er Chezer shortly, but Er Chezer, Er Yosher is ideas that come purely you, on your own, initiate and conceive of ideas. Er Chezer is ideas that come as a result of teaching another and the other challenges you, or you need to explain it to them, so that brings a deeper level of understanding in the topic. But Er Yashar is basically the straight flow. To put it literally, Er Yashar means a straight flow. Like the difference in Er Yashar, Er Chayzer, the classic difference is the sun and the moon. The sun is a luminary. It's a source of light. The moon is not a source of light. The moon reflects the light of the sun. So it's Er Chayzer. Okay, so he says, Sichlim hanimshachim b'derech Er Yashar. Hein mikeach hamaskil. They're from the Koyach HaMaskil. They come from the Koyach HaMaskil, which is the power of intelligence within the Nefesh. It's not Seichel yet. It's like we spoke about Koyach's Gluyim. So where's the Koyach's Goli come from? Where's a revealed faculty come from? It comes from a power to conceive intelligence. Sheba Nefesh. So basically you have the nefesh, you have the seichel, which is the faculty itself, and you have the koyach hamaskil, is the power within the nefesh to conceive. So it's like an interface between nefesh and seichel. The same thing you could say the koyach hariyah, the power to see, the koyach hachesed, koyach hagvura. But Koyach HaMaskil is what he's using here because he's comparing the highest faculty, Seichel, to Ratzon, to desire. So this is again the translation, Masha Nimshach min ha-nefesh li b'chinas mokel l'seichel.
Koyach hariyah is not like Koyach HaMaskil. Koyach hariyah
I
is
didn't say it is like a Koyach HaMaskil. I just said, to give an example, that everything that exists in a revealed faculty also has the power of that faculty within the nefesh. I didn't say it's the same thing. I said koyach hachesed also, koyach hagvura. Just wanted to point out how they all are existent. Okay. So now, v'hu the b'chinas hamshacha nelemes. The koyach hamaskil is hamshacha, but it's hamshacha nelemes. So to say is the etzem nefesh is the actual soul, it's not. But to say that is the revealed faculty, it's also not. So what do we call it? We call it hamshacha nelemes. It's been transmitted, but it's in a concealed state. In other words, when it's in the state of the koyach hamaskil, you don't see revealed intelligence yet. From there will originate. I gave the example of the difference in the Tahoim, the Mayan, and the Nar. So you have the source of water that comes from, let's say, the inner springs that are under the earth's crust, the well springs, that could be completely nelam until you dig a well and you draw the water out, and then it becomes revealed. But nevertheless, even the well springs that are not revealed are still not the core essence of where the water comes from, because that's even beyond. It's at least in a state of water, so to speak. Just a muscle. So kapon dahainu mashikfa nimshach ma nefesh. It's already been drawn. I don't know what's happening here. It's already been drawn from the nefesh, meaning it's come out of the nefesh. Li'esmoker, to be a source. Rakshu behelam adai. But it's still in the state of concealment. So if you remember in the last class, I explained that this is the process, how it all works. Nothing goes straight from etzem to gilui. It goes first, it comes out in a concealed way. Then it comes out a little revealed, and more revealed, and more revealed. This is the process of everything. Look at just a simple process of how we grow intelligently. You're born with all your faculties. Baruch Hashem, a healthy child. The fact, if you look at a newborn child, you don't see any of the faculties functioning except the external ones. You see the child breathing, you see the child seeing, moving, but you don't see the level of intelligence the child has. But there's a brain in there, and there's a koyach hamaskil. When the child starts learning, first different experiences, then it starts learning to speak, then it starts learning ben chamish lemikra and ben eser lemishnah. All these things, what's happening? The koyach hamaskil, which the child had at birth, is beginning to reveal itself. So everybody has their level of koyach hamaskil. I'm not getting now into how smart or intelligent this child is, but it's all in the process of the nefesh, the helam, and then the gili. So in a way, that also is a logical process of also how the Eibishter, as I explained, we learned a lot earlier, how Lifnei Tzimtzum even goes through these stages. The stage that first everything is just completely beyond existence. And then starts the Heskim, the what did we say? Consideration, and all the other steps, just to put it into context. So al kaponim, what we have now is there's seichel and there's the mokar haseichel. So the nefesh is now become the mokar haseichel, as through the koyach hamaskil, you have now a mokar of seichel. So remember, there's 3 levels right now that we're discussing. The nefesh, then the koyach hamaskil within the nefesh, which becomes a source. It's a concealed state of extension. And then comes the seichel goli. And from this koyach hamaskil, this hamshach and elemes, all the giluyim, all the revelations, the seichel, the yischakmus bedover ma, all the revelations of intelligence and yischakmus, innovation or conceiving. I mean, there's a lot of ways you can translate it. Any bedover ma, whenever you're logically and intelligently processing anything, it all comes from this koyach hamaskil. So it's like a type of reservoir from which everything all seichel will come. When it's still not revealed, it's a state of ne'elam, a helam. When it's revealed, it becomes seichel goli. And this is called v'hu nikra mazel machkim, Kaneda, as it's known. Mazel machkim, that's the name of it. Why is it called mazel? Because mazel, it refers to its source, but mazel also, as we spoke about, v'nezlim min halavonin, mazel comes also, mazel is a form of a flow. It's a flow, but a flow from a state that's higher than the revealed state. Okay. Now he's going to go to a level higher than the koyach hamaskil.
So koyach hamaskil is mazel machkim?
The word is, what does v'hu mean? V'hu hanikra mazel machkim. Yeah. Aval koyach haseichel hayuli ha'atzmi. But the power of seichel hayuli ha'atzmi. So now he's introducing another level. That's why I brought up all those levels before we began. I gave the whole introduction. That there's a level now called Seichel Hayuli Ha'atzmi. Hanatua Umushrish Be'etzem HaNefesh. Eine B'chinas Hamshacha Klal, Ve'ene Begeder Mokel HaSeichel. That is not even a state of Hamshacha, not even a concealed Hamshacha, transmission. And it's not the Geder, you can't even call it the source of Seichel. So now we've introduced a 4th level. Nefesh. Till now we have koyach hamaskil and seichel. Now he says between nefesh and koyach hamaskil, there's a level called koyach haseichel hayuli. Now the word hayuli, just for practical purpose, has a lot of things to say about it, but just for our purposes that we've discussed, hayuli is essentially a potential state. So what's the difference between hayuli and koyach hamaskil? Hayuli and koyach hamaskil is like you'd say a reservoir of water I mentioned. It's the water is there. However, you don't have access to it. When you create, let's say, pipes and you draw the water, let's say when you turn on the faucet in your sink, that water doesn't come yesh ma'ayin. There's water in the main pipelines, in the water mains that originate from the reservoirs, that originate from the rains, etc. What you're doing is just taking from a concealed state and you're revealing it. Koyach hayuli, you can't even call it a state like a reservoir. You could say in the nefesh, there's some type of force that is the potential for seichel, like an archetype more than an actual reality. Like we spoke somewhat, just as a comparison, that there's 2 types of concealment. There's a concealment, let's say something is locked up inside of a treasure chest. It's concealed, but it's not fundamentally beyond the revelation. All you need to do is open up the treasure chest. When it comes to Yuli, if you open the treasure chest, you're not going to see the koyach there. So this is part of the logical process, the way Hashem, the way God created, that it shouldn't jump, as I said, from etzem to gili. It goes nefesh, etzem nefesh. Then there's the koyches atzmim, which Bapashtus is the koyach Yuli here, the way he's describing it. Even though you could break it down into two, but for practical purposes. Then comes the koyach hamaskil. So now you have a power to conceive, but it is already in a state of a mokir. I'm not saying there's ideas inside of the koyach hamaskil like there's water inside the reservoir, but nevertheless, you could still call it the power to conceive. That means that it's there, and it's already considered a mokir. It's not beyond being a mokir and a source. Okay. Now, just to give an example, before we go on, let me give an example. I've given this example a number of times, because how do you distinguish between koyach hamaskil and the koyach Yuli? That's what he calls here koyach haseichel Yuli atzmi. So, just for argument's sake, let's think of an example like a simple example. Then I'll go back to seichel. First, I'll use an example of koyach hazrika, the power to throw. If someone gave you a stone and said, throw it, how far can you throw the stone? So you exert yourself, you step back, and you throw the stone, let's say 200 feet. I'm just throwing out a number. Now, before you threw the stone, the koyach was a koyach nelam. You have power in your hand, you know you have power in your hand. But then, it comes a koyach goli when you actually throw it. Now, someone will say to you, is that the maximum of as much as you can throw? You say, no. If I condition myself, if I exercise, I build up my muscles, I could maybe throw 400 feet. Just like a marathon, right? Now, so how far can you run? Half a mile. If you work at it, you can run a mile. Then you can run 5 miles, 10 miles, 20 miles. What's happening? What became yesh ma'ayin? You suddenly became a stronger person? You suddenly became a faster person? No. It's because the koyach goli is only as much as you've so far expressed and actualized your potential. It's not all your potential. Same thing with seichel. Seichel goli is the amount that you're right now expressing. It could be without a drop of effort. God blessed you with seichel. Without even effort, you understand certain things. Someone will say to you, is that the maximum you can understand? No, absolutely not. With yigiyah, we're going to learn in a moment. With exertion, you push yourself, and your seichel, you can push your seichel more. Where is this more coming from? A table is a table. A table doesn't have a potential to be anything else. A stone is a stone. But the human being, because we have koyches means that the nefesh, which is the source of it all, flows into the different levels that ultimately you can access. So the question is, can you access the koyach hayulia atzmi or not? The koyach hamaskil, obviously you can, because that's all seichel is coming from there. And obviously with a little work, you draw out more from the koyach hanelam, hamshachan nelemis, of the koyach hamaskil. That's what means pushing yourself. The question is, the hayulia atzmi is a place that is in the nefesh, and we're going to discuss in a moment how you can access that. On its own, you can't access it, because as smart as you may be, there's certain things you cannot reach into the koyach hayuli. Koyach hayuli is a state that right now is not accessible. Koyach hamaskil is in any type of good instruction, education, you're basically working on revealing the concealed. So how do you reach the koyach hayuli atzmi? So he's going to say now, through chezer. Ach koyach chezer. So hayuli atzmi is not a source for seichel. Even though in the nefesh it's the beginning of where seichel originates from, but you can't call it a source that you can access in a conventional way. However, here he says, through koyach of chezer, which means, as we'll see, from a refractive light, hari magia b'koyach haseichel hayuli atzmi. he reaches into this higher level of this potential, the core potential for seichel in the nefesh. And I was going to explain what's er chezer. Ukamoi aidei kushis beribe helamas v'estadim ala seichel. Through asking questions. When you come up with an idea, you can come up with a brilliant idea. And that reveals the koyach hamaskil is now expressing itself in seichel goli. Fine. But when someone asks questions and challenges the idea with a ribei helamas v'estadim, that's what a kasha is. What means halamas v'estadim? It means that it's not just a clear idea. Now it's being challenged. So kushi is compared to helen v'hester because you're like concealing and challenging the seichel. El yasher is revealed seichel. Fine, everything is fine. When you ask a question, you're challenging it. That's considered a helen v'hester on the seichel. So he says by doing that, by gdela. And once those questions are asked, and now the person who conceived or whoever is going to defend the original idea or explain it through Yegiya Gdela, through great effort and exertion, so now the questions have forced you to dig deeper to reach to understand the depth of this inyan in a more increased way. To remove the concealments and the coverings, the challenge basically. The seichel was challenged. You now have to dig deeper to confirm and to validate and affirm the idea, to remove the concealments. This compels you to go into the true seichel, not on a superficial level or the original revealed level, but omke in its depth, and its increased in inwardness or the inner deeper meaning of the idea. So just to use a simple example. So 1 second, let me just finish the sentence. This, the Er Chezer, reaches into the core power of intelligence. Higher than the Keach HaMaskil. Being you've reached down to the depth and the innerness of this idea. So this is a common experience. Just find an example in your life where you heard an idea or you expressed an idea. It was challenged or a question was asked, and that compelled you to go deeper in understanding. I mean, every Gemara, every Rashi, every time you learn Torah and you ask a question on the idea that's expressed, what does the question compel you to do? To look deeper, and suddenly you realize, oh, you didn't even realize the depth of the idea. So the Koyach HaMaskil works in an Er Yosher way. The power of intelligence to conceive ideas. But if you want to go into a deeper level of how the Seichel is mushrish, like he said, Notua, Umushrish, Be'etzem HaNefesh, there you have to go, and it could only be through a challenge, through a Helen V'Hester, through a Kasha, through resistance. To go back to the example that I mentioned with throwing a stone or running. If someone asks you how strong you are, so you can throw a stone as much as you can throw it. But let's say I put up resistance. Like, you're pushing your hand against my hand. So you can go as strong as you like, but when there's resistance, what happens? You dig deeper to overcome the resistance. So you have to dig into deeper keiches. That's what resistance does. This is the basic principle that we always say about as the Alter Rebbe when he was in prison. So the Rebbe Rashab writes, says in a Sikh in Teira Shalom, he says, it's hard to say this, but the imprisonment of the Alter Rebbe was begeder, was like a zayis, an olive that doesn't produce the oil until you press it. So very often, without a challenge, you'll see giluyim, but you don't see the deepest. Like similar when we say Basar Ligani brings Midas HaNetzachim, when a king has to fight to win because there's an opponent, there's an enemy, so he digs deeper and he's mevazbes ha'etzes. He pours out, he splurges all his treasures. So essentially, resistance has a power to go deeper than the koyach hamaskil. Now, this really is the power of avodah. That's what avodah does. Without avodah, you only reach that much. Through avodah means you put the work in, you reach deeper into the deeper resources of the nefesh. Now, all this is still coming to explain how the difference is seichel and rotzen. We didn't get back to that. But meanwhile, he's explaining the process of how the koyches atzmim relate to the koyach haseichel. So be patient till we finish the point. But right now, what suffices to say, he's explained that there's two ways that seichel comes from, emerges. One is b'derech er yashar, that's the normal seichel, when you use your intelligence. Another is through er chesed that comes from koyach hamaskil into the seichel goli. Basically, from koyach nalamim, koyach hamaskil amshachan alemes, to koyach to seichel goli. To reach into seichel yulia atzmi, deeper, even deeper, you need to have the resistance and the challenge that akasha and Helen Vester. This is why halachic Talmud Bavli, if there's a machlekes between Talmud Yerushalmi and Talmud Bavli, so the halach is like Talmud Bavli. Why? So it says, because Talmud Bavli not only is going to come after Talmud Yerushalmi, because Talmud Bavli is mechshakim heshivani zuhi Talmud shel Bavo. Because Talmud Bavli is filled with questions much more. Talmud Yerushalmi is compared to Er Yashar. So even though you may have here and there a question, but its focus is mostly giving us the halachas or giving us the information, the data. Talmud Bavli, you have a lot more arguments and counter arguments and back and forth. So Chassidus explains because that reaches deeper into the Seichel Yuli. So the depth that you get through Talmud Bavli goes even further than Talmud Yerushalmi. Not that Talmud Yerushalmi is not deep, but you don't see the depth until you challenge it. So if you really want to see what an intelligent person is, their true intelligence, you have to ask them questions. You have to challenge until you dig deeper and find the deeper resources, what he calls here, koyach haseichel yuli ha'atzmi. Okay. Ukenoida, continuing this theme, as it's known, be'inyan Talmud hamachkim es rabbi. In the Inyan, when you say a Talmud who sharpens the mind of the teacher, machkim means he makes him wiser. Well, how does a Talmud who's inferior and below the teacher's intelligence make him wiser? Because the student, either through asking questions or the need for the teacher to explain it on a lower level. So basically, the lowness of the student, precisely like the Gemara says, that he learned much from his, he asked him, where did you learn, he asked the Tana, where did you learn what you know? So he says, he learned much from Rabbi Isai. I learned much from my teachers. I learned much from my colleagues, my chaverim. And from my students, I learned most. So the obvious question, how could you learn more from your student than from your teacher? Because the student is the gedder of Er Chezer. The student, you have to bring it down, you have to explain it deeper, further, therefore you have to go deeper into it. The student will ask questions. Sometimes it could be even a simple question. But the Talmud is machkim es rabbi. This is the real gedder of Er Chezer. That's why when you teach, you always have to go deeper than when you're learning on your own, because you have to bring it down and explain it. I always say, I've said this many times, that when you have to explain an idea, let's say in Chassidus, in simple English, to people who never learned this idea before, tell me, do you need more seichel or less seichel for that? You think, you know what? I don't need to explain it that much. If I'm speaking to veterans and experts and who know Chassidus a lot, there you have to really work hard, because they know a person who never heard the word Mamalaklam or Sevaklam or Das Eli and Das Tachten, how much do you really have to do? But the fact is, it's the other way around. Because you need to bring it down to a lower place, there's more resistance, there's more Helen. That means that you have to dig deeper in understanding it really well to be able to explain it. That's why someone who can explain to a child an idea has to dig a lot deeper into seichel than someone who can explain it to a colleague or to someone, to a peer, to someone on his own level. So what is the dynamics? You could say the science behind it. This is what it is. That the koyach hamaskil is accessed when you're teaching regularly. And the koyach haseichel yulia atzmi is accessed when there's either Yigiyah, or I should say not either, when there's an exerted effort that comes due to a challenge or resistance or a helam or whatever it may be. That's what you see really, then you're accessing a deeper level of the seichel in the nefesh. So technically speaking, you can say the following, if you want a formula, that if a person, I don't say God forbid, but if a person never is taught, never had a student, never was challenged, never ever asked questions, so they may be a very intelligent person, but you could measure and say, okay, I know what this person's koyach hamaskil is made of, based on what he has expressed. But then comes the second level where there is a challenge. And you see now new sichlim, new ideas, new approaches, new innovations even. You need to innovate in new ways. Then measure the seichel of the person that's gone through the Chezer dimension. It'll be on a far different level, both in quantity and in quality. So you actually see here the process of how a revealed faculty, which is your revealed faculty that you and I are aware of, can access deeper levels all the way to the Koyach HaSeichel HaYulia Atzmi. Okay. So continuing, Shasichlim Ha'elu, these sichlim that come through Chezer now, the intelligence, the ideas that come due to the Talmud that sharpens the mind of his teacher, or due to the questions and the concealments and so on, these sichlim hemenailim b'yeser. They're very exalted, they're very higher, they're very high level. They're higher levels of seichel. Be'ein arech, not just higher, he says be'ein arech, infinitely higher. I don't know if the word infinite is the right word. Be'ein arech means completely different quality, a different level of intelligence. And this process of the Chezer, there could be giluyim without a limit. In other words, the Koyach HaMaskil is the regular flow. You can produce as much as you can produce. But the Chezer reaches a place where now it's a completely higher level, and there can be giluyim aden shir. And he's going to explain the parenthesis, what he means a little more about it. Hainu, but oisei ha-seichel, the same seichel that we're talking, the same idea or intelligence that we were discussing Yosher, that comes from the Koyach HaMaskil, the power of intelligence, into a revealed faculty. We're not talking about a different seichel. The same seichel, kishemagia el omke upnimiyuse, el emek upnimiyuse. You come to its depth and its inner dimension of it, idea hayegia, through the effort, exertion, it comes with a great flow. Neviah means a flow, a great. Neviah Rabbah would mean a free and expansive flow. By inyan, b'chinas bli gvul, by sichlim. So the same idea that before the questions was so-called a limited flow, now it's a Neviah Rabbah, it's flowing in an expanded way. Bli gvul is calling it, meaning without limits. But Pashtus, it doesn't mean bli gvul mamish, he means like mayin amizgaber. It's like you opened up, like through the challenge, you opened up the wellspring, and it's just flowing, from Breiten Farnem, it's flowing without end. Basichlim shemaskil. This basichlim shemaskil by Inyan, in the sichlim that he innovates, in the same idea through this. And new innovative ideas emerge within him that weren't even b'hashara. He couldn't even imagine it before. In other words, when the idea first was presented, so it was an idea. It was, let's say, a good idea. But then through the challenge and the concealments and the questions, and then through the yigiyah, the effort to dig deeper, he says, besides, so number one is a flow, an expanded flow, an unlimited amount of flow, and chidushim, ideas that he didn't even conceive of. The same person who conceived of the idea wasn't even aware of, even in his imagination, until it was challenged. I remember once.
The same idea, not only the same person, the same idea.
I said that 5 times already, yes. So now, I remember once by Fabrengen, the Rebbe spoke about something, and then we asked questions. And after the questions, the Rebbe developed this into a whole sugya that you would never have imagined. Now, I can't tell you what happened in the Rebbe's mind, but the Rebbe did once say in a Fabrengen that due to the questions, he realized the depth that he didn't even realize in the beginning. Even the Rebbe himself. Why? Because that's how it is. Sometimes you say something. You see this even in Elam Hazeh. People come up with an idea, and you don't really appreciate it till later when it's challenged, and then you start seeing and it's tested, and people come up with other theories. You go back and forth, and then you come to a deeper depth, and you realize, wow, this idea was far, far beyond what anyone ever imagined in the beginning. But he's saying even the person himself, and even the same idea, yes, all now reaches a whole different qualitative level. This is what Ur Chezer does, and the language that he's using, this is what, when you're the Yigiyah, the effort is accessing the Keich HaYuli Atzmi. Now he's going to give an example which is going to make it a lot easier to understand. We've talked about this example many times, but this is going to be the difference between, the famous example, the difference between a shalheves kshuda begacheles, a hot coal, the fire in a hot coal, and the sparks of fire that come from a flintstone. So, as we're going to learn in a moment, the difference is what's called in Samach Vav, he calls it mitzias. What's the word? Helam sheyeshna b'mitzias, helam she'ena b'mitzias. Similar to these 2 levels we're discussing here, that there's a concealment that's there, but it exists, but you just don't see it, and there's a concealment that doesn't even exist until through effort and exertion you access it. So he's going to give now the mashal. Kidua hamashal is, as it's known, the example for this, mitzur hachalamish. Sur hachalamish literally means sur is a stone. Chalamish means a flintstone. Chalamish is from the word like a fiery stone. How do you get fire from a flintstone? Is dafke through striking it. You have to exert and strike it. You can cut open the flintstone, you can do whatever you like. You're not going to get any sparks from it. A flintstone, when you strike it hard, then you get the hakah. That's hakah. Hakah means to strike. Dihine gacheles, here's the comparison. A gacheles, a coal, sheyesh ba'esh, tamun b'teicha, b'seicha, that has in it hidden, concealed flame. So think of a hot coal. We're not talking about a coal that you see the flames flowing from it, the flames rising from it. A hot white coal in a grill or wherever. So if you look at it with your naked eye, what do you see? For all you know, it's a burned out coal. However, God forbid, if you get closer, you touch it, or you get closer, you suddenly feel the heat. You fan it, you can get flame out of it. So he's going to say like this. It has eish tomen b'seicha. It's also, it is fire in it, but it's concealed within it. Because it's not fundamentally beyond revelation, you could draw the flame just by blowing on it or fanning it. Nifuach from the word like vayipach, blowing on it. Aval b'tzura chalamish, but with a flintstone, srichim hakor dafke. That's not enough. You can blow on a flintstone from today till tomorrow, and it won't do a thing. You need to strike it. With a coal, you don't need to strike it. So it's a helam, like you said before, hamshachan elemis, but with a little effort, not much effort, just blowing on it or fanning it, you reveal the flame. With a tzur chalamish, no, you must strike it. What's the difference between them? Because in the coal, the fire has a mitzvah. The fire is there. There's existing flame there. It's just you don't see it because the flame is receded into the coal. It's there. Mashenkin b'tzura chalamish. By contrast, in the flintstone, she'ena ha'esh b'mitzias klal. The ash is not existent there. You can cut open the flintstone. In other places of Chassidus, it says, I don't know if he's going to bring it here, that a coal, you put it into water, it extinguishes. Why? Because there's flame there. With a flintstone, you put it into water, it doesn't change anything. You take it out of the water, you can still strike it and there'll be sparks. Why? Because the flame is not existent. So bottom line is, you see here two different type of stones. One is a coal, one is a flintstone. You see a difference between what you're expressing from it. It's not finished yet with the muscle, but let's just continue here. So he says, yeah. Since the flame is not existent at all, so how are you going to get fire out of it, any type of spark out of it, if it's not there, revealed? It's not there even b'mitzias, existent, only through striking. The striking does something. The striking, in other words, which is, of course, the comparison to Yigiyah, the effort, reveals a deeper element inside the stone that you cannot reveal just through blowing on it. And there's a major difference between the two, the flintstone and the coal. Oh, actually, it's what I just said. Sorry. Yeah. In the chacheles, when it comes to a coal, at some point the fire is gonna die out. A coal doesn't burn forever. Mashenken b'tzura chalamish eina nichla le'elam. B'tzura chalamish in a flintstone, it never dies. It doesn't like the flintstone dries up and no more sparks. It will forever have the capacity to give off sparks. Vaha talia. So he made now two differences. So strike, as I said before about the water, that's basically the same idea. Of coal has a limited capacity. It'll burn, could be very hot, but it's going to burn out. He says that's Haba Talia, that's Talia, because there's a Mitzias of Eish. Mitzias at some point is going to dissipate. In the Surah Chalamish, because there's no Mitzias there. Because there's no Mitzias of Eish, so therefore it endures and it's always there. That's the Haba Talia, that these two differences between a coal and a flintstone are interdependent. Okay.
Why is the Gecheles is a Metzias and it has to be Nichla? Why? If it's a Metzias, it has to be Nichla?
That's the way it was created. What do you mean, why? First of all, everything is that way. Everything in this world is made of limited strength. We're going to soon learn about the difference in Koyach Yuli and a Koyach HaMaskil now in this regard. But the reason is God created different objects, different ways. Certain things have limited resources. At the end of the day, you can have fuel in your car, and then your car runs out of fuel. That's a given, because there's only limited space for fuel. If it's a Metzias, it's subject to the limits of time and space. Since it's not a Metzias in the Flintstone, so technically speaking, it doesn't have any expiration date and doesn't have any limit in how much there is in there. Okay, so now I'm going to bring, this is the mashal. This was an example. Now let's apply it to the nimshal. What's the moral of this in context of the koyach hamaskil and the koyach yuli hasechel, koyach hasechel yuli ha'atzmi? She says, "U'kumoy kein u'b'koyach hamaskil." Below they write in the footnote that's not clear in the Rebbe Rashab's handwriting if it said maskil or seichel. Yeah, because Bapashtis, he's going to say, B'keich HaMaskil HaYuli is not consistent to what we learned before. Keich HaMaskil HaYuli are two different levels. So that's why they're remarking below that maybe it says it Keich HaSeichel. But why they write maskil? Because it looks like maskil. But regardless, it's definitely not talking about Keich HaMaskil. Because he's going to say clearly, the same thing is B'keich HaSeichel HaYuli, Liya she'enu b'mitzias seichel klal. So now the tzura chalamish, the flintstone is compared to the koyach haseichel ayuli atzmi. The nefesh has this potential to produce intelligence, but it's not in the form of a mitzias. There's no seichel there. That's why the giluyim are unlimited. They continue to flow. Uboim, and how do they come? Ayidei yigia b'keich chezer dafke. And those seichlim come through effort, through exertion. Dafke b'keich chezer. The refractive energy that through the challenge, like striking this flintstone, is the similar idea of a question, a resistance that forces you to strike the idea, causes the sparks to come out of it. So that is the example for the koyach haseichel ayuli atzmi. So actually, there are three differences that I think he points out. One is that the seichel is not. Just a second. Yeah, there are 3 points here. I think I should just spell it out. One is the difference between the flintstone and the coal is that the flame is not in existence inside the flintstone, the sparks, as opposed to the coal. The second is that, and therefore one is unlimited and one is limited. And the third is that how do you draw it out is through striking it. Maybe I should reorder that. The second point is that by striking the tzura chalamish, you draw out the sparks. And by the coal, all you have to do is blow on it. And the third thing, maybe that's the ha-b'ha-talya. The third thing is that then when you indeed do that, well, it's all of them are interdependent. Then from the coal, you only get a limited amount of flame, and ultimately it will dissipate. Whereas from the tzura chalamish, it's an unlimited flow. So all three are necessary. All three components here. That's not b'mitzias, that is bli gvul, and that is through effort and exertion. Now, clearly, bli gvul here, as I said, it doesn't mean bli gvul when you say bli gvul amiti, because we're human beings. The seichel, no matter what, even the seichel yuli atzmi, is not bli gvul amiti. But it means, relatively speaking, and it could also mean that the seichel yuli really does have an unlimited flow. However, we as human beings are limited. So obviously, there's a point where because of our limitations, we're not able to access all of it. But the point is that both quantitatively and qualitatively, once there's that challenge, and you can access the deeper hiyuli, the deeper potential of intelligence within the nefesh, you're able to draw a whole new level of ideas, and in a far more unlimited way. Yeah. And I would explain that by saying, because if an intelligence comes through yashar, it is like the coal. It may be powerful, but that's what it is. Whatever it is, it is. It's the chezer, the yigia, that digs deeper and causes that type of flow to come out of it. I remember, for example, when the Rebbe, without going into names, when there were people, whoever they were, would talk against Eden, and they would say things that were very disturbing about Avos Yisrael and about, very disparaging about other Jews. So you find the deepest sichos of the Rebbe and Avos Yisrael came out. Some of the biggest chidushim of what a neshama is and so on were sichos that followed somebody attacking Jews. Remember, Vayikra Tov Shinun, Kisave Tov Shinun Aleph, and Vayechi and Shmeish Tov Shinun Aleph as well, where someone had said that there could be another Holocaust. The Rebbe gave a whole sikha, how that's not possible, etc., etc. My point is that once the challenge on a certain topic happens, then it's not just you come up with a deeper idea. Your whole personality and your whole approach becomes far deeper and far more, because you're not just compensating, you're coming to counteract that negativity or that challenge. So everything changes when it happens to that. It says in the Gemara, I don't know if he's going to bring it here, but in Samach Vav he brings it. He says that if we're not for the Luchas Shniyos, if we're not for the second set of tablets, we wouldn't have Mishnah and Gemara and Braisa and Medrash, etc. So that he asked the question, Chete Nisker? There's a question. A person who sins benefits from their sin. In other words, the whole Luchas Shniyos came because of Chet Egel. Luchas Rishenis was what Moshe Rabbeinu received at Matan Torah, and that was, of course, the most powerful Luchas of all. But it says clearly in the Eruvin and Darim, different Gemaras, that without the Luchas Shniyos, we'd never have all the Torah that we have today. So the Alter Rebbe Rashab asks, so that means that a sinner benefits from his sin. The Jews built a golden calf, a great sin. Because of that, they got the Luchas Shniyos, the second tablets, and now they're in a greater place than they were before. That's the expression of Chazal, that a sinner can benefit. So he explains the same idea here. He says, obviously not. That's not the case. It was the tshuva that did it. It wasn't that they sinned, therefore they got more Torah. It was the Yom Kippur that Moshe Rabbeinu went back on Har Sinai. We're coming from the Yom Nerayim now, Yom Tovim. Yom Kippur, Sukkot, Simchas Torah. Why do we dance on Simchas Torah? Why don't we dance Simchas Torah as Shavuos? So it says because it was the Kabbalah of Luchas Shniyos. So why is that greater? Because even though the Luchas Shniyos technically were a lower level, they were not Maisa Lekim. The Luchas themselves were carved by Moshe. The first Luchas, Hashem carved it and engraved the letters and gave it to Moshe. The second Luchas were a lower level, but because it came through tshuva, it came through a resistance. What happened? God had to reveal deeper keiches, Yud Gimel Midas Harachamim, which is the highest levels of Kesed and above, were revealed only because of this. Because Moshe went back on the mountain and he prayed to God again and again and again, 80 days. So Eid Yashar, the Torah, the law, took 40 days. Tshuva and Luchas Shniyos took 80 days, twice as much. Moshe had to exert himself, had to really push himself in the Eibishter. He said, erase my name from your Torah. He said, he broke the tablets. No, the Rebbe's famous Sikha, Simchas Torah, Tov Shemem Zayin, why Rashi concludes the whole Torah in Zeis HaBracha with this, that the Chol, what does Rashi say? All the miracles and wonders. He broke the tablets. And the Eibishter said, thank you for breaking them. The Rebbe, the most powerful emotional sikha back then in Mem Zayin, I remember it. The Rebbe was crying. It was before Akofis. And the Rebbe explained, why is that the greatest act? He took the Jews out of Mitzrayim. Kriyas Yamsuf, Matan Torah, 40 years in the wilderness. You're lacking Eisus and Mefsim. Rashi has to go dig up that he broke the tablets, which is a day we fast. On Shivas B'Tammuz, we fast because the tablets were broken. And what does this mean? God's thanking him for breaking the tablets. So the Rebbe explained basically this idea. He didn't say it in this language, but in different language. If you really want to know what a Nasi B'Yisrael is, a real leader, you don't look when it's good times. You look when he's under duress, when the people are challenged, when the Eibishter says, I want to start a new nation. Dafka through the Hell and the Hester brought the holiest day in the year, Yom Kippur, the Luchas Shniyos, and Dafka through that Yigiyah, that only could come through effort. Matan Torah didn't come with the same Yigiyah. It was given to them, Malmayla Lamata, Yosher. It was Yom Kippur that came through Aveda Malmata Lamailach, Chayzer, that reached a lot deeper into sort of called in Elikus itself, Salachti Kidvarecha, and forever everything was changed. And because of that, what happened? A flow of Torah that you would never have gotten in the Er Yasha. Not because it wasn't there. Of course, the Luchas Rishenis also have within them concealed everything that all the Torah Shabbat Peh has. Torah B'Pirusha no. Torah was given with this explanation, but it wouldn't have been revealed to us. It was Dafka through the darkness that brought a revelation that you never would have received without it. I mean, just another way of explaining what he's saying here, or essentially what he's saying here is explaining what I'm saying, that The Er Chezer digs deeper into the Etzem HaNefesh, in this case, Koyach Yulia Atzmi, and the Giluyim are what he calls Bli Gvul. They flow, they continue to flow, Sichlim, Koyach HaMaskel, even in the ideas that were known before through Er Yasher. So you're reaching deeper than the Koyach. So you can basically say Matan Torah is like the Koyach HaMaskel, and Yom Kippur, Luchas Rishenis, and Er Yasher, and Yom Kippur, Luchas Shnias is like the Koyach Yulia Atzmi. If you want to
Which
have
chaylik is this? Which chaylik is this? Tovshim Mem Zayin Simchas Torah. Which chaylik?
Well, if you really want to capture it, you should read the Sikh in the Hanocha. But it was Muga, I think it's Chelik Lamed Daled. I think it's Chelik Lamed Daled. Yeah. But the real emotions, the Rebbe was crying, and when he spoke the Sikh, it was unbelievable. Okay.
In Teras Menachem, the Hanocha?
Read the Sikh in the Yiddish Hanocha. The Teres Menachem might as well read Likutei Sichos. Okay. So now, we still have to understand how all this is coming to explain the difference between Ratzon and Seichel and Ratzon, and the Koyach Nivdal and not Nivdal from the Koyach Atzmim. So let's see what he's going to say now. So he says like this. Uboim ha'idei Yegia, b'Koyach Er Chezer Dafke. Okay, that's where we stopped. Now he's going back to the opening of this whole discussion. All this is coming to explain how Seichel Goli is Nivdal from Koyach Atzmi. Umitzias ha'sichlim elu b'Koyach ha'Seichel Atzmi. Okay. Now, the existence now, this Seichel that came through Yegia, through the effort that came, followed questions and a concealment. What relationship do they have to the Seichel Hiyuli Atzmi? She says, Harihem nimtsoyim b'derech nivdal min ha'Koyach ha'atzmi. They exist in a form they're removed from the Koyach ha'atzmi.
Skip the line.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Mitzias ha'sichim elam b'Koyach ha'Seichel Atzmi hem b'derech nivdal min ha'etzem. They're in a form of nivdal. I'll explain in a moment. Nivdal means separate from the etzem, from where they originate. Liyah shenimtzoyim b'chinas mitzias sichlim, being that now they become the existence of Seichel. Remember, in the Tzura Chalomish, in the Flintstone, or the Koyach Hiyuli Atzmi of the Seichel, there's no existence of sparks. There's no existence of Seichel there. So Hariyem Nitzoyim b'derech nivdal min ha'Koyach ha'atzmi. So therefore, they're in an oifen of nivdal. They're removed from there. Okay. He's going to explain now in a rather, like a 10-line parentheses more about this. But let me explain what he's saying right now, which I think maybe you understand on your own, but let me explain it. So on one hand, it's true that now, through the effort that came Er Chezer, you reached a far higher level and a far more abundant level of flow, a free flow, Bli Gvul, and all that he just said. But the relationship between Etzem, Koyach ha'atzmi, of Seichel, and the Seichel Giluyim of the revealed intelligence still remains apart from each other. When you talk about Er Yashar is a flow. You have brain power, and your mind is now expressing ideas. So yes, it's limited. It's like the coal, the flame, the flame within the hot coal, and all the other stuff. But there's a relationship. This is Mokra Seichel, this is Seichel. The second level did not come through you naturally. It came through some outside challenge, that there was a question asked, or a student, or as I said with Yom Kippur, a real Helen Behester. However you explain it, it's something like that forced the situation. You wouldn't have gone there on your own. So that's called striking the stone. So in a sense, the relationship between sparks that fly from the stone and the sparks the way they were in the potential state of the flintstone remain nivdal. They don't have a direct flow. It's not like once you strike the stone, sparks just continue to flow like it is with the coal. With the coal, the mila of the coal is that the relationship between the revealed flame and the concealed flame are commensurate to each other. It's a flow. Yes, you had to blow on the coal. You had to fan it. But in a sense, it's relative to each other, concealed, revealed. When you're reaching Koyach HaAtzmi, he's saying, there you have to go with a very different approach. You have to find an exertion that comes through a challenge. And that, Taka reaches deeper, but the flow is not a direct flow. There's a nivdal, because the gili is not a gili of a helam. It's a gili of an etzem. It's coming from the atzmi. So that's why it's called koyach nivdal. That the koyach haseichel is separate from even the koyach atzmi in the nefesh. Rotzen, he's going to explain shortly after the parentheses, that his Rotzen doesn't work that way. So again, we haven't finished the idea yet, but that's the central point that he's making right now. So let's go, just to make it a little more relevant to our discussions about interface. We've talked many times that an interface needs to have a dimension of both things it's connecting. Let's say teacher and student, they need an interface. They need some language and some examples that connect them. Same thing with Elikus, Boida and Nivra, the creator and the creation. So they're able to create a Seder Shtalshus here, the Ayin Beis. So the mile of the Ayin Amiti is that it's closer and a reflection of Atzmos. The mile of the Ayin of the Yesh Nivra is that it relates more to us. We can relate to it. So Elikus on our terms, so to speak. God feeds you, he sustains you, gives you life, health, blessings, etc. Each one has a mile that the other one doesn't have. The mile of the Ayin of Yesh Amiti gives you a real taste of what Atzmos is like. But that's not necessary on our terms. The Ayin of the Yesh Nivra is on our terms. So each one has something that the other one doesn't have. Something is more accessible to us, is a lower level. That would be like more like the flame within the coal. That's accessible. It's taka koyach hamaskil. It's concealed, but it doesn't take much effort. You fan it, you access it. On the other hand, the ayin of the Yesh Amiti al derech, the Tzor Chalomish, is much beyond this. It's coming from an it's in the etzem, it's a koyach atzmi. So on one hand, it's a much deeper level because it's much closer to the nefesh. But on the other hand, we don't relate to it. We can only access it through striking the stone, or in this case, the effort and exertion of learning something due to questions. So you're reaching in a deeper place, but we are farther away from it. The gili is farther away from it. So it's a nivdal. And this is not a matter of this is all coming to explain, obviously, the difference between Ratzon and Seichel, which is coming to explain the difference between Oyer and Yesh. That Oyer we're going to learn. Well, I don't want to jump it, but basically Yesh comes from a deeper place, but it's nivdal. And the Oyer comes from, also, Atzmos is beyond it, but it's not in the form of nivdal. It reveals, it's a revealer. So it's far closer, it reveals Atzmos. That's where he's going to ultimately end up. So I'm just pointing it out, so we should have this structure and context here. So it's a deep concept, but it's meritic when you think about it, how he's developing and building this up. Should we read the parentheses or should we stop here? What do you say?
You explained it very well, but could you explain a little more about the Tzor Halomish, the Seichel, after the Yegia, which is coming out in such a powerful way? It's nivdal min ho'etem. What does it mean in more practical word?
I just explained, because the sparks that fly from the flintstone, still, what's their connection to the flintstone? It's be'efa nivdal. You don't see, as I said, the flintstone doesn't suddenly come alive and sparks. You have to keep striking it, and the sparks actually fly out of it. That's nivdal. The sparks are nivdal from the tzur. When it comes to the coal,
that's about the seichel, the nimshal, the seichel, not the sparks. We understand.
The nimshal is even better understood, The seichel that comes through Yegiya is like the sparks. They're not suddenly attached to the etzem. The etzem remains etzem. Etzem is not a mitzias. There's no mitzias seichel inside the etzem keich yuli. It's like the flintstone. But when you strike through effort, you can access, something comes flying out of there. Those are the deeper flow of ideas. But the etzem still remains always a keich atzmi. It didn't change.
Okay.
So keich atzmi remains a keich atzmi. Yes, you can access it, and the more effort you make, the more you access it. But it's not like keich hamaskil is accessible. It's like the natural flow. Every time you think of an idea, without anything, is coming from the keich hamaskil. If you want it to come from the atzmi, you're going to need a process. You're going to need effort. You're going to need challenge, etc. So at the end of the day, the keich atzmi here and the seichel goli here are apart from each other, whereas the keich hamaskil and the seichel are not. He doesn't say it explicitly, but clearly the sparks fly from the stone. That tells you right away that it's nivdal. In other words, a spark flies from it. Yes, the spark can light a flame. That's what a flintstone. But the spark and the stone always remain two different domains. The flame from the coal does not remain two different domains. As a matter of fact, the flame doesn't even jump anywhere. The flame is coming from the coal and remains attached to the coal all the time. The coal was in a concealed state and a revealed state. So, okay, you know what? I'll read the parentheses. Maybe it'll help us explain this also. Okay. So he says, the same is the case with the ideas that come from the koyach hamaskil, the power to conceive ideas. They're also in a state of nivdal. Oh, wow. So he's saying, in other words, seichel, first he said seichel from the koyach yuli is nivdal separate. Now he's saying even from koyach hamaskil, it's also somewhat removed. Different than what I just explained. But let's see what he's going to say. Shari koyach hamaskil ena musig ve'ena murgish b'amtsoas hasichlim mimenu. Because even the koyach hamaskil is not understandable, comprehensible, and you don't feel it when you come when b'amtsoas hasichlim, when you conceive of ideas. When you conceive of an idea, you know it's coming from somewhere, but it's not like you identify it. It's not in a revealed place. It's not like I said, water coming. You take a cup of water from a pitcher. It's very clear. You see where it's coming from. The koyach hamaskil remains somewhat removed from the ideas that emerge from it. It's still not seichel yuli atzmi. He's just qualifying that also is somewhat nivdal, because it's not musig and it's not murgish. What is felt is only the fact that it's coming from some source. That's for sure. You know, an idea, you realize it came where? That's why we say koyach ma, chochma, ma. Where did it come from? So you recognize it came from somewhere, but you can't identify the exact source. Now he's going the other way around. On the other hand, it's not like something that exists that doesn't feel any source. What we're talking, the yesh hanivra. There's no, the yesh hanivra does not feel anything. You exist right now, you and I, you don't feel like came from somewhere. You may believe it, you may come to understand it, but like seichel, when you get an idea, you right away know it came from somewhere. So, you know, where did it come from? Here, you're saying there are things that you don't even feel that. It's completely nivdal, which of course is going to be the example for yesh as opposed to er. So like the yesh. Sheina margish klal she yesh moker hamahave. Hamahav hoy. Interesting.
Hamehavehu. Hamehavehu.
Right, hamahavehu. Usually it says hamahave, but okay, hamahavehu. So he doesn't feel at all the yesh, that there's a source that brought him into being, into existence. Ubeseichel margish yesh moker. Ashenkim beseichel, you sense that there is a source. But also in a way that you don't feel what the source really is. The only thing you feel that there is a source that from there it came from. Okay, so right now he's distinguished basically between three levels. Seichel hayulia atzmi. Well, it's not three actually. No, I'm sorry. Seichel hayulia atzmi is completely nivdal. You don't even feel there's a source. Seichel hamaskil is you also don't understand, and it's still removed because you don't understand or feel, but you know at least there's a source.
You're sure about Seichel Hayuli Atzmi that you don't feel that there is a source, not direct source, but you don't feel? It's coming really here.
I'm pretty sure of that, yeah. Because he's not trying to, because at the end of the day, he said, Koyecha Maskil. I'm sorry, the Koyech Yuli Atzmi is Be'efa Nivdal. So the Chiddush is that even the Koyecha Maskil has a certain Havdalah. Yeah, I'm sure of that. Yes. That's why he says it's not Begeder Moker and Be'efa Nivdal. Anyway, let me just finish this parenthesis. The Gamzeis, and also additionally, She'em Mitzias Ayde Hergish Mekere. 1 minute.
Maybe She'ein Noi, not She'ein. Maybe it's a mistake, printing mistake.
Well, before we get a printing mistake, let's see if it
No,
makes sense.
I don't know.
Hold on. I want to read the end.
She'ein Noi Misius is make more sense in human mind, I think. Be'ilo ve'olo.
Give me a moment.
Sorry.
I
I think it makes more sense.
Okay, no, he doesn't. And the ain works. He's saying like this. So number one is that the Koyach HaMaskil, even though you sense there's a source, you don't sense what the source is like. In other words, you don't sense the actual source. You just sense, let me rephrase that. You don't sense the actual source. You just sense there is a source. Now he's saying additionally that it's not a mitzias. This source, the sensing of the source is not like a mitzias of a koyach hamaskil. Like by ilav olol, by cause and effect, kama ilav olol, there the olol, the effect, senses the existence. Not just that it senses it, but it's an existent source. Like I said, a pitcher of water, you pour a cup of water. So not only do you know the source, the source is also mitzias. He's saying here that it's not a mitzias. The mitzias of seichel, that you have the seichel goli, is not the mitzias of the seichel, the koyach hamaskil is not a mitzias. Gam zei she'en mitzias adei hergish mekere.
Yeah, but I think it's much more to say she'ein noi mitzius. Okay.
Well, listen, I try to not correct the Rebbe Rashab if you don't have to.
No, I understand.
Gam zei she'en mitzias.
Trying to understand more, except correct.
This is back to Chachma, right?
I don't know if it's the same pshat also. But Gam zei she'en mitzias. Just a moment. basically the fact that you sense there is a source is not in a form of a mitzias. Ukiyadua, like by ilval, the seichel mumaylam seichel, seichel that comes from a place that's higher than seichel, koyach hamaskel. He apparently, who al derech yesh ma'ayin. It's like yesh ma'ayin, chachokma ma'ayin timotza. Like it says elsewhere, the kashem sheklos haseichel ukoyach shachutz le'etzem hanefesh. Just as the general seichel is a koyach, like we said, a faculty that's outside of the etzem hanefesh because it's a specific faculty. The same thing, the way seichel actually emerges from its source, it's in a removed way, both from koyach hamaskil on a lower level and koyach hayuli asmi on a higher level. That's what he's saying here.
How is it in Ilav ve'olul?
Ilav, it's not koyach nivdal. There's no nivdal. Ilav is like pouring water from a pitcher to a cup. Everything is connected.
The olul feels that is mitzius is because of the ilo, right?
In the olul, in the Ilav, the olul both feels the market, and the market is a mitzius, like the olul is. They're both relative.
The olul is a mitzius, but it feels that this is because of his moker, right?
I said two things. That one, it feels that it's a market. It not just feels it's market. It actually sees its market. It recognizes its market. Here, it just feels there is a market, but doesn't see the market, doesn't sense what kind of market it is. And the second thing, in Ilav Ol, the Ila is a mitzias, just like the Ol is a mitzias. They're mitzias in the same world. They're in the same domain. It's just one is cause and effect. Yesh ma'ayin is always separate. Yesh and ayin don't have anything in common in their realities. The only thing is that the ayin creates the yesh.
Actually, you can actually combine it with childbirth because, in one sense, you know the makkah of your mother, and in other sense, you don't know the ayin.
Well, okay. Okay, we'll stop here at the bottom of page 11.